Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here. In this video, we're going to talk about how to structure your training and why to do so in order to promote better bone health and stronger bones overall. So as always, here is the plan for the video. We'll first talk about what the problem is that we're trying to solve and a little bit about what the magnitude of the problem can be. We'll then move into Wolff's Law, which is the sort of fundamental principle that dictates how we go about solving this problem. We'll highlight a few vulnerable areas that are in the body that are prone to be or to have weaker bones as we grow older. We'll then discuss what the important and relevant features of a training program are that are going to be important for building stronger bones. We'll put all that into practice with a couple example progressions and an example training session. And then we'll finish up with a reference slide that's just going to contain all the references upon which I am basing the information in this video. These will also, I'll hyperlink them in the description box below for a bit of an easier reference if you're interested in that. So the strength of a bone is measured through something called bone mineral density. So bones derive their strength from minerals like calcium, phosphorus, etc. And how densely packed these minerals are within the bone dictate how strong or how weak the bone is. So a bone with a much higher density of minerals within it, a higher bone mineral density, is going to be much stronger than a bone with a much lower bone mineral density. And I bring that up because you might hear me use bone strength, bone mineral density kind of interchangeably as we go throughout this video. So you can just assume they are the same thing. As our bones decrease in bone mineral density, there are two sort of categories depending on how severe the decrease is. The first is osteopenia, and the second and more severe is probably more well known is osteoporosis. These two conditions won't really cause pain inherently themselves, but they will significantly predispose you to enduring a fracture, which could be, from a slip and a fall, or it could just be from walking around daily life and your bones not being strong enough to hold up your body throughout the day. And when a fracture occurs as a result of decreased bone mineral density, such as osteoporosis, the road back to a normal life can be a very long, arduous, sometimes a road that's not even completed. This is the reason why so many people over the age of 65, when they endure a fall, why there's such a high mortality rate within a year. It's because they experience something like a hip fracture when the fall occurs. And then there is a laundry list of health issues that can occur secondary to that eventually result in the mortality. And it's worth noting that some of this is out of our control. Something I don't have listed here is that there is a number of different medical conditions that might predispose someone to having weaker bones throughout their life. There is some inherent age-related decrease in bone mineral density that occurs over time. And then women have it particularly difficult because as they go through menopause and estrogen decreases substantially in their body, they become significantly more at risk for having decreased bone mineral density, such as osteopenia or osteoporosis, because estrogen is a very potent bone building signal within the body. However, a lot of this is in our control, and that is dictated by something called Wolff's Law, which we'll discuss right now. And most simply put, Wolff's Law states that bone adapts in response to the loading that it experiences. But the important thing is that this goes in both directions. So if you load a bone through something like exercise, it will over time get stronger because, just like a muscle, as you increase the weight of a given exercise, the bone itself, as well as all the other tissues, have to adapt and become more robust and become more capable in order to accommodate that increased load. However, conversely, if there is an absence of a loading stimulus to a bone, your body will proactively decrease the strength and the mineral density of that bone. The reason why is that the number one thing that our body is concerned with is making sure we have enough energy in the body to survive the current moment. And as far as our body is concerned, the more energy that is available or the less that we have to expend, the better. And again, because that gives us the best chance of surviving the current moment. Now, bone, like every other tissue in the body, is metabolically active and it costs energy, it costs calories in order to maintain and build it. And if you don't give your body a good enough reason to keep strong bones and build stronger bones over time, then it's not going to do so. It's kind of similar to if you pulled up your checking account and saw you had something like a Blockbuster subscription still being paid every single month. The first thing you're going to think to do is cancel that because you're not using it. And that's what your body does with bone and other tissues for that matter. But if you're not going to use the subscription of stronger bones, then your body's going to cancel the subscription and save on those costs. Something else that is a component of what Wolff's Law is a bit of specificity. So a bone will only adapt if itself is loaded. So if I do like a bicep curl, my femur, my thigh bone is not going to get stronger from that. I don't have it listed as a bullet point here. I should, but there is a certain threshold of force that must be exceeded in order for a bone building stimulus to be provided to the body. And that is something that we'll talk about in a bit more detail because it's a bit more specific to our training protocols as we get into that. And then, bone adapts to the direction of loading as well as the type of loading. And the different types of loading we will discuss again in training protocols. That's a bit more specific to that section. But an easy example to sort of illustrate what I mean by the direction of loading is if you take a long bone, let's say your femur, your thigh bone, you can provide a compressive force to that or a sort of bending force to that. And both of those types of resistance, both of those types of forces are going to cause the bone to adapt in different ways. So the point here is that you need a variety of different directions of loading as well as different types of loading in order to get the most optimal response in your bones as possible. And now this idea of Wolff's Law, it does apply to every bone in the body. And every bone is equally as, or has the equal potential to increase or decrease in strength over time. But there are a few parts of the body that are a bit more troublesome and typically cause people more problems than others. And this is why they're oftentimes measured more directly and with more focus than other parts of the body. And these include the spine and the hip. And there are certain, bony structures within these bones that are sort of more relevant. That's not necessarily super important or relevant to our discussion here today, but what is relevant is that most of the fractures or broken bones that occur as a result of osteopenia or osteoporosis are going to occur at the spine and the hip. And if they occur here, they're going to cause a significantly greater amount of trouble to a person than if they occurred in the wrist, for instance. So if any part of your training program or any of the goals of why you're following a given training program are to increase bone mineral density, then loading these structures with a variety of different types of loading, as well as different directions of loading, is paramount to make sure your program is going to be as effective as it should be. So as we move into the specific training protocols for building stronger bones, there's three main sections that are worth discussing, and we'll go through each one of these one by one. So now these three forms of exercise were selected because in post-menopausal women, the population that is the most difficult to induce actual increases in bone strength. Again, because hormonally they are already at a significant disadvantage. The combination of these three forms of exercise in a training session is the only kind of training that has actually been shown to increase the strength of their bones. Pilates, for instance, has been shown to maintain bone strength in post-menopausal women, which again is already a pretty good thing because what you expect is a pretty significant decrease. But the combination of these three kinds of exercises are the only ones that have been shown to actually increase it, not just maintain it, which is even more remarkable. So the term resistance training refers to really any general strength training that people are probably most familiar with. Lifting weights, calisthenics like push-ups, pull-ups, stuff like that. And for any training program oriented towards building bone mineral density, this is going to make up the most volume of what the training program actually is. And it really is the bread and butter of what's going to get you the most results. The key thing to point out here, though, is that it must be intense. So if you're doing a set of deadlifts, let's say, and you're using a weight that you could do, let's say 20 reps, but you did 10, that's not going to provide a very meaningful stimulus to building strong bones anywhere. It's important that you get somewhat close to failure. So failure being defined as the point in which you cannot really perform any more reps because your muscles are just not able to move the weight anymore. You need to get at least 2 to 3 reps shy of that point. And you need to be honest with yourself. Are you actually at failure or 2 or 3 reps shy of failure? Because without getting to that point, you're not going to provide any meaningful stimulus to really get those bones to adapt. And it doesn't matter how many reps you do. It could be a 5 rep set where you could have done 6 or 7, or a 15 rep set where you could have done 16 or 17. What matters is the proximity to failure. So in other words, how hard are you trying? How close to that point of failure are you getting? That is the feature of the resistance training that's going to dictate whether or not the exercise is actually stimulating bone growth. And just as a little tangent to add in here, what this really should look like is, you do one set of an exercise, you truly rest about 2 to 3-ish minutes, and then you do that exercise again for however many number of planned sets you have. If you're doing something like circuit training, where you're just going, through a circuit of different exercises with no rest, you're always going to be too cardiovascularly fatigued in order to get anywhere near the force required to stimulate bone growth. So while something like circuit training might feel intense just from how hard it is, it's not truly intense in the way that actually matters for building strong bones. And this is really where the concept of exercise selection matters most, which we'll discuss on the next slide. High velocity training refers to focusing on the speed of the force and not necessarily the magnitude of the force. And this is important because bone responds to both of those stimuli, the magnitude as well as the speed of the force. And typically when you have exercises that sort of isolate each variable, you get the best results as far as building bone strength goes. So for instance, let's say you're doing a set of bicep curls and you're taking that set close to failure. So you're getting to the point where your muscles can't do any more reps to true fatigue. As you reach that point, the weight on the way up is going to move more slowly because your muscles are more tired. There's a high magnitude of force in terms of how hard the muscle is pulling on the bone, but there's not a high speed of force. So because you're not really going to get the high velocity stimulus from the resistance training, at least as much as you really should be, that's why isolating it a little bit, it can be beneficial. And the easiest example of this is something like box jumps. So with a box jump, you set up a box in front of you. It doesn't really matter too much the height of it. You then jump as high as you can and you use that box just to sort of soften the landing. And in that example, the muscles of your legs must contract at their maximum speed, their maximum velocity, in order to actually get you to leave the ground. Another example would be, let's say you're going to do goblet squats and you're going to use a weight in which you could do 10 reps and hit failure. A high velocity version of that would be to take that weight, divide it in half, and do half the number of reps, but on each rep, get up, stand up from the bottom of the squat as quickly as humanly possible. Now, a set like that is not going to fatigue you too much, and that's important because the more fatigued you get, the less able you're going to be to actually produce any high velocity. It's also for that reason that it's important that this sort of high velocity training goes first in a training session. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to hit those speeds that you need to hit. Impact training is the component that typically surprises the most number of people because everyone thinks that high impact exercise is just for some reason bad for you. And to be fair, exposing yourself to more impact than your body is ready for can be bad for you, but that's true for anything. In other words, there is some dose of impact that is appropriate and tolerable and will cause your body to adapt. And you can progress that over time because your body, like anything else, can adapt to the stimulus of impact over time. And one of the ways it does that is through building stronger bones. Because really impact training, what it does is it's your best way to sort of combine the magnitude of force and the velocity of force into the same thing. And again, in postmenopausal women, the people who are at the greatest disadvantage for bone strength, the only training protocols, such as the Lift More trial, which is going to be linked down below, that actually increase their bone mineral density include all three types of these trainings. And an example of impact training that is just pure impact is take the box you were using for the box jumps here. Start at the top and just fall off it and then land, obviously in an appropriate way. But in that sense, the landing response, the only stimulus that's occurring is the impact, the landing. So since higher velocity training and impact training is a bit newer and not as well understood to most people, I wanted to give a few sort of progression examples of what this might look like so that it becomes a bit more real. So if you are just starting out, you've never done this kind of training at all before, ever, the easiest entry point is going to be something called an extensive pogo. So I'm going to play this video here. So all you're really doing is imagining you're jumping rope for the most part. So what I want you to notice is that my knees and my hips are staying mostly straight. They're bending a little bit as I do it. I'm bouncing mostly through the ankle. And really one of the things you want to think about is getting off the ground as quickly as humanly possible. You're not jumping high. That's not the point of this. You're just trying to get off the ground as quickly as possible. And this is an exercise that you can do for a high number of reps without feeling too beat down or fatigued or anything like that. And it can give you a really good stimulus to get started with the exposure of impact. As you get more comfortable with this, what you can do is slowly make them more intensive. So an intensive pogo is the same thing. You're getting off the ground as quickly as humanly possible. But the difference is that with each jump, you are trying to get also as high as you possibly can. Now, I do want to note that this comes with a concordant decrease in the number of reps that you perform. And you don't have to go just from this to purely this. You can sort of grade it and make them just slightly more intensive and slightly less extensive as you get to this point. But when it comes to beginning training velocity and impact type of training, this is in my opinion, the easiest way to start and the one that really anyone can do, even just while you're cooking or something like that. Something a little bit more advanced that you can progress to over time as you adapt are, you could, it's not listed here, but depth drops where you're on this box and you just drop and land would be an easy way to start before both of these. From the depth drop, you can move into a depth jump, just like that. And then over time, as you train this, you get more comfortable, your body adapts. You can move into a simple, just repeated vertical jump where you're jumping up as high as you can, getting off the ground as high as you can, but doing it through your ankles, your knees, and your hips all together. And if you're at this point where your program includes some type of exercise that looks like these, you don't really need to isolate velocity and impact into different exercises because this is going to cover both of them just perfectly fine. In the beginning, it can be helpful to isolate them, as we'll show in the example session I have coming up on the next slide, I believe, or maybe in a few slides, because these can be kind of advanced and they should not be jumped right into right away. But presumably you will get to this point over time. And once you're here, you can just have this as your only training for velocity and impact. So we've covered the need for different types of training, different types of contractions, different types of stimuli to the bone. Now we're going to talk about the need to load them in different directions, which is really the crux of what I want to cover with regard to exercise selection. So if we're going to talk about trying to build bone mineral density in the spine specifically, let's compare a barbell back squat to a deadlift of any kind to a plank. So with a barbell back squat, the barbell or whatever type of bar you're using is sitting at the top of the vertebral column. It is going to allow you to load the spine in that way at a much higher level than really any other exercise you can do. And so the stimulus of a compressive type of force to the spine is going to be better in a barbell back squat than really in anything else. Like an accordion, what's happening is that you provide the compressive force, your body adapts, and it can handle more load in that compressive manner over time. Deadlifts will provide that same kind of force intermittently when you're at the top of the rep, so to speak, when you're standing up. But as you hinge over and you're in a more bent over position, there is more of a bend type of stimulus to the vertebral bodies than you would be able to achieve in a barbell back squat. And again, that's a function of your torso being perpendicular or parallel to the floor. Planks are going to provide the same type of parallel bending type stimulus to the vertebral column as deadlifts will, but in the other direction, because it's the muscles on the other side of the spine that are pulling on it and causing that bending force to be incurred. Now, of course, this is an inexhaustive list of the different ways you can load the spine, but I just wanted to illustrate that if your goal was to build a stronger spine, build stronger bones within the spine, you need exercises that load it in different ways, such as these three do. The final thing to note is training frequency, or how many times per week do you need to do this in order to see best results. And typically what you find when you look at the research is that one training per week in the manner that we have described and in the such as the example session we'll talk about next is typically insufficient to really induce any change in bone mineral density. 2 trainings per week is usually shown as enough to get over the hump and start seeing results in that positive direction, whereas 3 is really the point at which you get the most results that are going to be possible for you. So here is an example session of if the goal was to induce changes in bone mineral density, presumably good ones, in the hip and the spine specifically, this is what an example session might look like. So extensive pogos, box jumps, we've already talked about. Goblet squats, probably not going to be as stimulating as a barbell back squat, but still good enough. And I did try to make this somewhat beginner friendly this session. Deadlifts and planks we also already talked about. And then side planks for the same reason as the planks could provide a bit of a bending force, but in a more of a sideways direction, let's say. Now do please note, let me also just say that none of this is medical advice. That disclaimer is also going to be in the caption down below. If you have osteoporosis or if you're at the later ends of osteopenia, it's really important that you work with someone to find out what your appropriate starting point is and what your appropriate path of or rate of progression is. Because if you currently have significantly decreased strength in your bones, the act of lifting itself can induce a fracture. I mean, in people with really advanced osteoporosis, just holding up their body against gravity can cause fractures. My point with this is try not to follow any generic program without some sort of guidance to make sure you're doing it safely if you fall into this category down here. So here are the references that I used to construct this video. Hope you found this somewhat helpful, interesting, or somewhere between. I'll link these down below in case you're interested in that. Again, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.